Father's Day comes with a mixture of emotions for many people. For me, it brings memories of my late father. He too was a pastor, and I often miss him. I love the opportunity to bounce certain ideas off from him. It wasn't a perfect relationship. We definitely had our moments, but mostly I feel very blessed to be the son of Howard Danner. I know that not everyone is able to make such an affirmation about their father, and so I am most grateful that I can. I also have been thinking about my own role as a dad. Lord knows I've made my share of mistakes over the years. But if Father's Day cards can be believed, my daughter Liz and my two sons, Matt and Bruce, seem to have weathered my parenting. I speak of my two boys as my sons, which in my mind they are. They are just that, my sons. Biology isn't really what counts when it comes to such things. But technically, they are my stepsons. Our number two son, Bruce, really enjoyed fishing as a child. And while I've not been part of that pursuit, I can hardly stand the sight of worms, much less putting one on a hook. His biological dad has been a part of it. Indeed, one of our very favorite pictures of Bruce as a child was taken right here in Florida long before any of us moved here. He and his dad had gone fishing together, and 8 or 9-year-old Bruce is holding up his catch, a single fish, for the camera. Bruce is very light-skinned, and he'd gotten a bit of sunburn, but he's wearing his baseball cap, he's got his fish, and the pride and joy on his young face is palpable. I've heard that Florida has the very best fishing in the entire world. As I've said, I'm not a fisherman myself, so I can't verify that as true or not. And in light of the fact that fishermen are often known to, how shall we say it, stretch the truth, it could be that that's just the boast of proud Floridians. But whatever the case, there can be little argument that fishing off our shores is excellent. No doubt there are some fathers and sons, probably some daughters too, who are celebrating this Father's Day not by going to church together, but rather by sharing a boat ride out into the Gulf where they will try their luck at one of the oldest pursuits of humanity. Several of Jesus' disciples would have understood the ins and outs of fishing, not, however, because it was their hobby, rather because it was how they earned their living. Before they started traipsing around the countryside with Jesus, at least 4 of them, Peter, Andrew, James, and John, had plied the waters of Galilee, casting their nets and hauling in fish that they would then sell at the local markets. Indeed, some of those aboard the craft at the center of our gospel reading today would have been old hands when it came to navigating the waters of the lake. They knew how to rig a sail and cast a line. They knew the ropes, figuratively and literally. So the fact that they were so very frightened by this storm would seem to point to its strength. This was a rip-roaring thunderstorm with wind gusts that blew them off course and swells that threatened to capsize the boat itself. It's not that the Galilee is that big. It's sometimes called the Sea of Galilee, but it's fresh water, it's just a lake, and it's only about 12 miles by 20. But because of the way it sits in a valley, storms can and do come up suddenly as a late afternoon storm in Florida. Jesus had been preaching on the western shore of the lake. And when he is through offering up his parables, it's time to move on. It's evening. And he decides they'll go and save some time by cutting across the lake itself. No doubt he's exhausted from a full day of preaching the good news and healing the sick. And so, trusting the skills of the fisherman and his small troop, he falls asleep in the stern of the boat. Rather amazingly, when the storm first erupts, he's not wakened by the sounds of thunder, the flashes of lightning, the beating rains, or the howling winds. He sleeps through it all. That is, until his frantic disciples shake him by the shoulders. "Wake up, Jesus!" Desperate, they shout over the winds, "Don't you care that we're perishing? We're doing our level best here to stay afloat, but the storm's getting the better of us. Wake up!" Their pleas are heard, and the master awakes. Perhaps he rubs his eyes and surveys the chaotic scene unfolding before him. He looks into the face of Peter and sees fear. He takes in the panic in Andrew's voice. Even James and John, who are nicknamed the sons of thunder after all, even they are shaking. These experienced fishermen are all unnerved by this storm. So he stands up. "Peace! Be still." And as suddenly as it has started, the storm subsides. The sail that had threatened to break loose flaps in a gentle breeze. The waters stop coming in over the gunwales. He looks around as his disciples begin to breathe more easily. "Why are you afraid?" he asks. "Have you still no faith?" Can't you just picture the disciples as they sit there, their jaws dropped open? "How did it happen?" they're asking each other. "Who then is this, that even the wind and the sea obey him?" What an amazing miracle, they're thinking. He stopped the storm. But what if this story reflects a different truth? What if it's not really about what scholars call a nature miracle? What if it's not so much about Jesus and his abilities as it is about the disciples and theirs? Think about those Floridian storms, how they can whip up in a minute, but they can also stop on a dime. The sky turns dark, the wind picks up, and they come on like gangbusters. You know, you've experienced dozens of them. But then, just as quickly, the sky lightens up, the wind slows to a crawl, and as quickly as they started, they're done. That's how it can be on Galilee. What if Jesus wasn't using some supernatural power, but rather using his God-given abilities to observe the world around him? What if, when Jesus stood up in that boat, he realized that the storm was about to break? What if the skies were growing lighter? What if the clouds were beginning to part? What if he simply observed what was happening and spoke of its end? Peace, be still. What if his rebuke of the disciples wasn't about their lack of faith in Jesus, but rather their lack of faith in themselves? Why are you afraid? He asks them. Have you no faith? Have you no faith in your abilities to handle this? I do. I have faith in you. That's why I was willing to take a nap. I trusted that you guys could be able to handle anything that came up. I mean, hey, I'm a carpenter. I'm a preacher. I'm a landlubber. What do I know about boats and storms and fishing? But you fellas, especially you, Peter, and you, Andrew, and you, James and John, you're experienced fishermen. You've spent more hours on these waters than you can even count. I had faith in you. Why did you lose faith in yourselves? Now, this story happens early in the book of Mark. And maybe it's that the message just hadn't gotten through yet. Maybe they hadn't realized what it was all about, this Jesus stuff. But in time, as evidenced by the founding of the church after Jesus' death and resurrection, as evidenced by the fact that Peter and the others would eventually all venture forth with a real sense of confidence in their ability to share the good news, in time, they do get it. We wouldn't be here if they hadn't gotten it. For you see, Jesus came to remind us all that we are beloved children of God. And despite what others may say, each and every one of us have been given the gifts necessary to live life as God would have us live it. Jesus came to teach us about faith in God, yes, no question. But he also came to teach us to have faith in ourselves. For it is in the very depths of our being that God resides. Clementa Pinckney was the 41-year-old pastor of Emmanuel African Methodist Episcopal Church in Charleston, South Carolina. He was also a state senator, considered by many to be the moral compass of the South Carolina legislature. According to one source, he was especially fond of quoting Micah 6:8. The Lord has told you, O mortal, what is good, to do justice, and to love kindness and to walk humbly with your God. The church he served is known as Mother Emmanuel, and over its long history, it has served as the focal point for the struggle for racial justice. It is a congregation also marked by its love of kindness. Last Wednesday, Pastor Pinckney was leading the weekly midweek Bible study. Though predominantly an African-American congregation, Mother Emmanuel is a very welcoming place, so no one gave much thought to the fact that there was a young white man in attendance that night. Later, he would say that folks were so kind to him that he almost gave up his plan. Almost. But an hour or so into the evening, he opened fire. And when he was done, 9 of the 13 people there were mortally wounded, including Pastor Pinckney. The church, the legislature, the city of Charleston, indeed, the nation mourns his death, along with those of the 8 other victims. A pastor, a legislator, a leader is gone. But for Eliana and Milana Pinckney, it is far more than that. For they have lost a father. And on this day in particular, one cannot help but wonder at their sorrow and their grief. 2 little girls without their daddy. But wonder as we might about their sorrow, we needn't wonder about the legacy that their father has left them. Like Jesus in the boat, as we face this latest storm of hatred and violence, Pinckney most likely would remind all of us, including his daughters, that God has already given us what we need to resist the wave of hatred. What the church is all about, Pinckney said in a sermon 2 years ago, is the freedom to be fully what God intends us to be. And just this spring, after an unarmed black man was shot by a white officer in South Carolina, Pinckney asked his fellow legislators if they would, in his words, rise to be what we really say we are. It is a question for all of us on this day. Will we, the Church of Jesus Christ, in this place at this time, will we rise to be what we really say we are? Will we be what God calls us to be? Will we love kindness and do justice? Will we work for racial reconciliation, not just say it's a good idea, but work for it? Will we help address the needs of those who are mentally ill and not just wring our hands and say, oh, well, it's Florida, what do you expect? Will we speak out against gun violence and help find solutions to the problem instead of saying, oh, Second Amendment? I don't know about you, but I've had enough. But it will continue to be as it is unless we work to change things. On this Father's Day, we are in the midst of a great storm, and the winds of fear and the waves of hatred threaten to sink our ship. But for Eliana and Milana and all the children of our nation, including all the children just represented by dads and grandpas and great-grandpas, for them, if not for ourselves, let us have faith enough to trim the sails and steer the ship in a new direction. Let us have faith in God and faith in ourselves and faith in one another. For together, but only together, we can sail safely into the harbor of peace and justice for all. Peace, be still. Amen. Sisters and brothers, earlier this morning, downstairs in Heron Hall, there were exactly 13 of us doing what we do every Sunday morning, studying together, learning about God and God's people. Exactly the same number, 13. Charleston's not so far away. Let us remember that. I invite you to join me now as we read the list of names of those who died at Mother Emanuel. I invite you to join me in lifting them up to God. Ethel Lance, Sharonda Coleman Singleton, Cynthia Hurd, Tawanza Saunders, Myra Thompson, the Reverend Daniel Simmons, the Reverend DePayne Middleton Doctor, Susie Jackson, the Reverend Clementa Pinke, Might we love kindness even as they did. Might we, like that historic congregation, work for justice. Might we, like their pastor, be people of wisdom, willing to speak up and speak out. Amen.